Welcome the chosen ones. Some people get money from their parents. You got a battle as an inheritance. Your forebears never made it. That's the type of reality that no one gets ready for. And the craziest part, you didn't just get through it. You took on so much grief that it might have wiped out whole bloodlines if it had hit the wrong person. That's not an exaggeration. That has to do with psychology and biology. For once we agree. Research shows that trauma may be passed down through DNA, like a family recipe that no one asked for. But strangely, you were the only one who didn't choke on it. But this is where things become interesting. You weren't intended to make it out with your sanity, your sensitive side, or your sense of humor still intact. You were meant to shatter and go away. Close down or get angry. The world really thought you would give up by chapter 3. Even your foes undoubtedly felt you were just one problem away from breaking down like a cheap phone charger. You changed into something that no one saw coming. Not even you. Because you didn't break down when life threw terrible suffering at you. You changed. You turned into a walking contradiction. Someone who had wounds from their ancestors but didn't want to be a museum of misery. Someone who might destroy a village with their feelings yet still chuckled at methods at 2M. Someone who didn't only get better. You changed your mind. That's what this subject is all about. You didn't only go through agony. It's that you took in agony in amounts that should have stopped. Whole lines of people. You take on emotional obligations that in the past needed whole communities to deal with. But somehow you became better. Not broken, not numb. Not the same. Can't explain it. Not the same. People look at you and wonder what happened to you. Your energy shifted, your instincts became sharper, and your depth became scary. Your strength became something. Science can't measure everything, and spirituality can't name everything. You changed into someone who shouldn't be on paper. But here you are, living, changing, and bearing stories that would make most people want to retire from life early. So get ready, because we're going to explain precisely what you became, how Peyton changed you from the inside out, and why you're now working at a level that your family has never seen before. And don't worry, we'll add some comedy so we don't unintentionally call up your ancestors for a TED lecture. First of all, you were the one who shattered an algorithm that has been around for a long time. Most individuals believe that they are only coping with their own problems in life. But you weren't simply fighting your own fights. You were fighting with patterns that had been going on for a long time before you were born. Your family didn't provide you money or advice. They gave each other emotional loops. The same worries, the same bad relationships, and the same times when you shut off emotionally. The same just put up with it attitude. People in every generation repeated the same script because they didn't have the fortitude, clarity, or bravery to question it. You were the first thing that went wrong in that whole sequence. Your sorrow was unusual since it wasn't designed for just one individual. It was anguish that had built up over time, like interest on emotional obligations. Your family tree never paid off. You felt things strongly not because you were weak, but because you were carrying the emotional baggage of individuals who didn't know how to deal with what happened to them. The worry, the weight, and the peculiar feeling of, why is this so intense? It wasn't all by chance. You had a code in you that stated you had to interrupt the cycle or it would eat you. And you didn't get eaten. You didn't break down in the same old ways. Instead, you stopped and thought about everything. Why do I act this way? Why do I want this? Why does this hurt so badly? These questions weren't easy. They were the first signs that the algorithm was going to break down when you started examining instead of repeating. You messed up the emotional foundation that your family had relied on for years. Your change puzzled the people around you for this reason. They thought you would act the same way, tell the same tales, and do the same things over and over. But you didn't. You become unexpected in the greatest manner imaginable. Your mending wasn't only for you. It was a new version. By being the first person in your family to face sorrow instead of running away from it, you changed the emotional software of your whole bloodline. You didn't pass the trauma on. You didn't try to make it look normal. You stopped it, took it apart, and performed the emotional work. No one else had the strength to even try before you. That's what it means to break an algorithm that works for a generation. You didn't simply make it. You changed the programming on everything. Second, you became the emotional wall that your family never had. Anyone else would have broken under the weight of the mental load you carried. You didn't only take in your own anguish. You took on the unresolved sadness, fear, and guilt of everyone who came before you. Somehow, every secret, betrayal, and heartache that your forefathers never properly dealt with ended up on your shoulders. And instead of letting it crush you, you turned that weight into a shield. You become the barrier that your family never knew about. They needed. Give it some thought. For generations before you, emotional instability was passed down like an inherited. People learned how to stay alive, not how to do well. They realized that trauma is a part of life. That agony was natural. Emotional wounds were something you just carried around until they broke you. You didn't. You took the same inherited difficulties, dealt with them, and put up walls inside yourself to keep them from spreading to the next generation. You became the one who could handle what was going on with Bill without allowing it get out of hand and cause problems. That's a lot of power. No one in your family has done it before. It took time to build your firewall. Every time you got hurt, every time someone betrayed you, every time you should have been broken, you took it in, thought about it, and changed it. You built an internal system that could sense danger, manipulation, and unresolved trauma before they became problems. People around you started to notice that something was off, but they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. You weren't only strong. You were immune to the emotional infections that had been bothering your family for years. And the reality is that getting immunity costs something. Most individuals would have shut down or fled away if they had to carry what you did alone. But you didn't hide from the weight. Instead, you stayed present with it. As a result, you became a living firewall. You were the line of defense that made sure your lineage would not only live, but also have a chance to do well. You didn't just keep yourself safe. You kept secure the generations who came before you and the ones that will come after you. You made a safe place for your family that they never had. And by doing so, you changed the rules for what it meant to pass on pain. Third, you were the first in your line to stand up without asking. For years, your family survived by getting smaller, playing tiny, and following rules that no one questioned. The greatest success was to stay alive. People were afraid to voice their minds, stand up for themselves, or take up space because they knew the consequences would be too harsh. That compliance turned into a type of quiet training and invisible cage that everyone thought was normal. And then you came with pain that you had inherited and might have killed you. But instead of bowing, you stood straight. You stood in a way that no one else had before. And you did it without getting anyone's permission. This wasn't being cocky or going against the rules just to be rebellious. It was a gut-level, unyielding rejection to keep along with the cycle of capitulation. You saw the rules that kept your ancestors small and the unspoken codes that kept them small, but you just ignored them. You didn't need permission to say you were there. You said it. You didn't let the shame, guilt, or terror that defined your family history tell you what to do. Every time you stood your ground, you were sending a message to history. This ends here. This has a huge effect. People around you may not know it, but others want you to follow the rules, be predictable, and quietly accept the unfairness of life. You become the most powerful kind of unpredictable person. Someone who doesn't back down when faced with something. Someone who doesn't give in while they are in a tough position. Someone who stands up and defies old rules and phobias just by being there. You changed what you and everyone else can do. Your bravery wasn't showy or flamboyant. It was exact, planned, and based on knowledge. You learned to select your fights and spoke with authority because you had to. You didn't merely get through the agony. You made it the type of power that people had to respect. You became the model for everyone in your family who had ever felt stuck, voiceless, or invisible when they stood without permission. You shattered bonds that had been around for hundreds of years. And now nothing can make you go back into the prison that your forefathers thought was unavoidable. For you become the only one who can't be fooled by the same old tricks. People use the same old techniques to try to dominate your forebears. Feelings of guilt, shame, duty, subtle threats, and emotional blackmail. They were able to do it because they had generations of unresolved anguish and terror that they didn't question. They didn't know how to see manipulation for what it truly was, so they acted on instinct. Patterns that kept them tiny and obedient again and over again. You inherited the echoes of that past, and at first it felt like the same trap was closing in on you. But something within wouldn't give in. You changed because you didn't merely get through these tricks. You learned from every attempt they made to tug strings, every disguised threat, and every tiny sting of guilt. Pain made your mind sharper to the point that you could see through people's plans before they were completely formed. You learned to predict how others would act, to see the psychological tricks that worked on everyone else, and to break them down inside yourself before they ever got to you. You became untouchable in ways that no one around you could see right away. It wasn't about being arrogant or wanting to be in charge. It was about staying alive and changing. You carried hereditary pain that was so great that it may kill you. in terms of feelings, spirituality, and sometimes even physically. That stress let you build an innate radar, which is a type of emotional immunity that helped you deal with family, job, and relationships with ease. People who attempted the same techniques on you left feeling puzzled, angry, or even vulnerable since you were no longer following the same rules that your forefathers did. This immunity became a part of who you are over time. You can do more than simply fight manipulation. It's that you automatically neutralize it, converting possible attacks into lessons, insights, or even chances to get forward. Manipulators are afraid of you just being there because they know they've lost the upper hand before the game even starts. You didn't merely disrupt the pattern. You were the outlier, the odd one out, the person in your family who changed the rules for how to handle emotions and affect others. You become the bearer of strength that wasn't designed for just one individual. The burden you bear was never designed for just one person. It wasn't only the pain, the losses, or the betrayals. It was the anguish that others who came before you had not dealt with. The troubles of those who came before you made things worse. Generations of dread, sadness, and unresolved questions somehow fell on you, focused in ways that would have broken anybody else. But somehow you were able to hold it. You didn't give up. You didn't bend so much that you couldn't be recognized. You become the bearer of a strength that is so uncommon it seems almost inhuman since it was never designed for one individual to carry alone. You didn't choose to be strong. It arose from need. The storms in your mind were huge, but you took them in so well that no one else around you could have done it as well, even if they would have fallen apart. You took in, changed, and held. That power turned into something bigger than just staying alive. It became into armor, a means to keep yourself safe and stop the same problems from passing down to your children. You didn't simply get over the trauma you had from your parents. You turned it into strength. Strength and understanding. People notice it even if they can't put a name to it. People that are shallow don't like how deep you are. A presence that demands respect without asking for it. That's because the strength you have isn't for show. You don't show it off to get attention. It's natural, shaped by trauma from fire and the type of determination that won't give up no matter how harsh life gets. You become a receptacle for something greater than yourself. A live example that great sorrow and great progress may happen at the same time. And the most amazing part, that strength isn't always there. It becomes stronger every time life throws you another insurmountable problem. History strives to repeat itself all the time. People always think you'll give up. You carry what was never meant for one person just like those who came before you. And by doing this, you've changed what it means to be strong and spiritually strong. You didn't simply get by. You were the personification of generational power finally condensed in one body. 6. You were the first person to love yourself without anyone telling you that love wasn't something that came from your family. What they gave you was the ability to endure, make sacrifices, and find a middle ground, as well as the belief that your worth would always be based on what you could give or withstand. No one ever told you that you should put yourself first. No one ever shown you how to appreciate yourself without feeling bad about it. But you still found a way to accomplish it. You were the first person in your family to learn how to love yourself as a practice that could stand up to life's stresses, not just as a theory or a passing sensation. The burden of hereditary trauma and the unending scrutiny of others. You learned the hard way. Every time someone hurt you, betrayed you, or didn't understand you, it was a lesson in how to guard your own soul. You didn't wait for someone to tell you it was okay, give you permission, or help you. You didn't even need someone else to show you the way. You put it together piece by piece, error after mistake, and rejection by rejection. What other people might have seen as excuses to close. You used this as proof that your worth as a person was not up for debate. You set the bar for love for yourself. By doing this, you changed the rules that your ancestors had lived by for hundreds of years. This self-love isn't weak or passive. It's fierce. On purpose and with self-control. You know how valuable you are, which makes you strong. But it's not being cocky. It's a mix of survival and evolution. People around you may sense it, even if they don't know it. They see that you don't change your mind to make them happy, that you don't grovel for their approval, and that your happiness doesn't depend on anybody else like you. That strength, that anchoring, that feeling of self is a revolutionary act in your family. You didn't merely alter your life by loving yourself first. You established a standard. You become the model for everyone who comes after you. Demonstrating that self-respect, self-worth, and self-love are not privileges. They are necessary for survival, evolution, and breaking cycles that have been going on for generations. You didn't merely get through the agony. You came out full, focused, and true to yourself. Number 7, you were the only one who went through trauma without using it as a weapon. Most people who get pain from someone else turn it on themselves. They use generational trauma as a weapon, against the people around them, on purpose or not. Because that's all they know. They keep going through cycles of rage, control, manipulation, and resentment. But you didn't. You carried pain that might have killed you and everyone else around you. But you won't use it as a weapon. You were the only one who responded instead of moving on, which made you an outlier among a long series of survivors. You tackled trauma head-on, fully aware of how strong it is. And instead of letting it control what you do, you allow it teach you how to be disciplined, aware, and in charge of your feelings. Every hit, every betrayal, and every time someone tried to shatter you taught you how to control yourself. You realized that grief doesn't have to make people into monsters. It may make someone who knows how deep pain is without making it worse. That's why people don't think much of you at first. They think that grief has turned you tough, harsh, or spiteful. Instead, they look for someone who can handle the pressure without letting it get out of hand. You showed that great pain doesn't have to mean death. It takes wisdom, strength, and an intentional change. If you faced trauma without using it as a weapon, you too became quite unusual in your emotional environment. Most individuals use revenge, sarcasm, or control to get their way since that's how their families taught them to stay alive. You didn't. You took in what you learned, thought about it, and went forward with clarity. You made a place inside yourself where suffering is present but not the most important thing. That area was a safe place for you to grow and for the people around you who might still be stuck in inherited cycles to heal. Anyone who was anticipating typical reactions is suddenly disarmed by your presence. You don't become angry, you don't hurt others, and you don't make things worse for no reason. You've turned pain into a quiet but powerful force, the type of strength that builds futures instead of tearing them down. You didn't merely get over the agony by doing this. You interrupted the pattern completely, showing that pain can be dealt with without being the weapon it was supposed to be. You woke up among a line of people who lived on autopilot for survival. Your forebears lived on autopilot. They made it through. They did as they were told. They did what the patterns told them to do. And they didn't often have the time to stop and think. For them, life was just about staying alive. Getting through the day, keeping the peace, remaining safe, and putting food on the table. They couldn't afford to be introspective, emotionally intelligent, or self-aware. But you were not like that. Pain that was too strong, too long, and too specific to ignore brought you back to consciousness. That weight needed to be seen. It needed to be conscious. It made you realize the parts of life that had kept your family stuck for centuries. Every hard time, every betrayal, and every fear you had from your parents was like a mirror that showed you precisely what patterns your ancestors had become stuck in. You didn't only feel the hurt. You looked at it, were drawn to it, and figured out where it came from. Where other people didn't think about it. You saw where other people thought that injustice was unavoidable. You asked it. Your mind turned into a place where you could test out emotional and generational patterns. You broke down the reasons, causes, and effects. Not to condemn or blame, but to learn and stop the pattern. That's what it really means to be aware. It's the capacity to look beyond what's in front of you, to perceive the unseen chains that others view as real, and to take measures to change the outcome. You became aware of pain and strength. It provided you a clear view that no one else had before you. You could handle issues that would have left your forefathers stuck for years. Seeing danger, lies, or trickery. You become someone who doesn't merely respond before it might take hold. You respond in a smart, emotional, and spiritual way. You don't perceive life as a sequence of random happenings. Instead, you see it as a series of patterns that can be understood, changed, and changed again. You didn't merely live through this. You changed. You rebuilt the code that your family used to run their autopilot for hundreds of years. You were conscious in a way that transformed the course of your life and set the standard for future generations. You didn't get your consciousness from anyone else. Everything that sought to break you made it stronger, and now nothing can stop you. Number 9, you were the only one who didn't want to make disorder normal. Your family has dealt with turmoil for generations. There was no doubt about dysfunction. People thought it was normal and celebrated it. People learned to put up with compromise and seem like everything was okay because they had to avoid conflict and keep up appearances. Toxic relationships, emotional manipulation, betrayal, and neglect were all packaged as things that had to happen. But you didn't. You saw the problems around you, which most people labeled tradition or reality, and you wouldn't let it become normal. You didn't bend, dismiss, or make excuses for something that should never have been tolerated in the first place. Not normalizing dysfunction is a bold thing to do. It's not simple to recognize the cracks and not walk over them. When everyone else is pretending the floor is solid, it takes guts to say what you see. You become the odd one out because you didn't want emotional upheaval to control your life or your legacy. You didn't want to keep doing things that had hurt everyone else. That one refusal changed everything. Every decision you made, every limit you set, and every time you refused to put up with disrespect created a statement. This cycle finishes with me. Your reluctance doesn't come from being angry or resentful. It comes from being clear. You know that if you don't do anything about dysfunction, it will get worse. You prevent yourself and everyone who comes after you from making the same mistakes by not accepting it. You become a role model for being responsible, having self-respect, and being aware. Living in a family that often puts survival ahead of honesty. People around you can tell even if they can't put it into words. Your presence has a weight and depth that shows you aren't following the old rules. You didn't merely protect yourself by not normalizing dysfunction. You made a plan for transformation. You showed that instability that runs in families can be stopped. That anguish doesn't have to shape the following generation. And that power comes from being able to see things clearly and act on them. You showed that not settling for what's broken is not just an option. It's a bloodline revolution. It all starts with you. 10. You were the first to figure out that pain isn't punishment. Most of your predecessors had to do it. Punishment was pain. It was proof that life had been unfair to them, that they were cursed, or that they had failed in some way that couldn't be seen. They felt guilty and sad at the same time, and they felt ashamed and angry at the same time, believing that pain and suffering were a part of life. But you broke that story. You learned something that your family never knew. The suffering wasn't meant to hurt you. It was designed to provide you a job. Every hardship, every betrayal, and every situation that should have broken you was actually part of a bigger plan that only someone as strong as you could carry out. This change in understanding made everything different. When pain turns into punishment, it makes you a slave, keeps you tiny, and pushes you to respond to survive. When suffering becomes a task, it changes you, makes your instincts sharper, and brings forth abilities you didn't know you possessed. You stopped thinking of yourself as a victim and started thinking of yourself as the operative, the one who was chosen to carry, face, and finally get rid of the problems that your forebears could never solve. You made a sequence of conscious decisions in your life, guided by knowledge instead of fear. Instead of giving up, make a plan. You had a power that most people would never understand when you saw pain as a task. You started to see problems as lessons that were meant to help you grow. You didn't waste energy complaining about what occurred. You thought about ways to get stronger, wiser, and more stable along the way. Every trial turned into a tool. Every cut becomes a plan. And every emotional scar showed how strong you were and how much you could do that others couldn't. That knowledge also changed your legacy. You became the one who could carry the weight of centuries without having it break you. The one who could turn pain into talent, heartache into wisdom, and anguish into clarity. You didn't merely survive because you knew that pain was part of the job. You became someone who had a purpose built into every part of you. You showed that pain isn't a punishment, it's a duty, and you were picked to finish number. You became the living example that trauma can be alchemized. Most individuals pass on trauma like a chain that never stops. It shows up in the way people deal with life or don't deal with it in their relationships and behaviors. Generations repeat patterns because they don't know how to do things differently. But you didn't simply get trauma from your parents. You changed it. You showed that pain, no matter how profound, can be converted into something far better than suffering. You converted wounds you got from your parents into knowledge, heartache into strength, and betrayal into intuition. You didn't simply get over trauma, you did. This type of change isn't only skin deep or for a short time. It gets deep into your bones, into how you think, behave, and talk to other people. Every time you felt emotional weight, it was a lesson in how to handle it. Your predecessors may have responded, absorbed, or buried their suffering. You saw it, thought about it, and then used it in a different way. That is alchemy in action. The ability to turn pain into energy for development, strength, and awareness. You took the turmoil you inherited and molded it into a base for clarity, strength, and great emotional intelligence. People around you frequently feel it without knowing why. You have a depth to your presence, a grounded energy, and a silent authority that comes from going through storms that no one else could handle and coming out stronger, not better. That's because trauma in your instance didn't only leave scars. It gave me understanding. You can see patterns, guess what others will do, and get through life in ways that most people can't. What was designed to make you weak has become a superpower, an internal compass made of fire. And the most amazing thing is that this alchemy passes down across generations. By changing your trauma instead of passing it on, you broke a pattern that had been holding your family back for decades. You showed that pain doesn't have to shape the following generation. It can teach, give them strength, and help them grow. You didn't merely go through what was supposed to break you. You turned it into wisdom and power that will last beyond your life, proving that pain can be changed, controlled, and even made better. You become the one who isn't afraid of emotional darkness. People learn to be afraid of their own shadows as they grow older. They learn to hide from pain, push down despair, and run away from sensations that are too big to hold. Your ancestors lived by staying away from the dark, pretending it wasn't there, or numbing themselves to it. You didn't. You dealt with it. You looked it in the eye. You lived in it and knew how heavy it was. And you didn't let it take over your life. That's why you are the sort of person who can handle emotional storms without flinching. Someone who has the silent power of survival and mastery while they are around doesn't have to seem cold or distant. It means recognizing how strong you are and pushing yourself beyond those limitations. It means learning what you can handle and what you should leave behind. You went through betrayal, anguish, shame, and agony from your ancestors that would have broken virtually anybody. But instead of breaking down, you took it all in, thought about it, and made sense of it all. That level of understanding made emotional darkness a teacher instead of a danger. Every unpleasant moment turned into data. Each dread turned into a step. Every scar served as a reminder that you are still alive and stronger than before. People around you can feel it right away even if they can't put it into words. People who like to be in charge or are afraid of you are scared by your calm, steady presence. They think that being weak would break you, but they discover someone who has learned to live with pain and come out stronger. You learned how to deal with emotional upheaval with strategy, clarity, and grace. You've seen depths that others are afraid of, but instead of letting them take over your life, you've learned to deal with them by accepting emotional darkness instead of being afraid of it. You changed something. Your family tree led to a source of power. You become someone who can survive, change, and even do well where others would fail. You didn't only get over emotional storms. You become the calm center of the storm, untouchable. That's what it means to face the darkness and come out not only whole, but also unstoppable. You were the first person in your family to grow out of the identity you were born with. Your forefathers had a very restricted idea of who they might be. Survival, expectation, and limitation defined who they were. They were defined by their positions, duties, and regulations that they never questioned. And for many years, everyone believed this to be true. You didn't. Pain made you wonder who you really are. Every fight, every betrayal, and every weight you got from your parents made you wonder, who am I really? And more importantly, who am I authorized to change into? By going beyond the restrictions that held everyone else back. You grew out of the identity you were given at birth. This isn't about acting out just to appear cool. It's about change. You know that holding on to old identities, habits, or expectations would have kept you stuck in the same patterns that hurt your ancestors. You began to let go of things that didn't help you, such beliefs, actions, and even relationships. And by doing this, you made room for a part of yourself that had never been in your family. You turned into a person who is hard to pin down and has many layers. People who expect you to follow the rules don't like that freedom since they are used to things happening in the same way over and over again. You were a live contradiction to everything they thought was set in stone about culture, ancestry, or fate. You also got stronger as you outgrew your inherent identity. You learned to define yourself by the choices you make, not by the limits that were given to you. Pain that was meant to make you smaller turned out to be a way to grow. You become clearer, more focused, and stronger in ways that few people have the guts to do. You didn't merely go above and beyond what was expected. By doing this, you went beyond them. You didn't only make your life better. You changed the course of your whole family. You were the first person in generations to reject to let circumstance, history, or inherited restrictions define you. You showed that identity isn't set in stone. It may change, adapt, and expand in ways that no one knew were conceivable. You didn't merely make it through the past. You changed it. And by doing this, you become the first person to do something. You become the rewriting that generations of people hoped for without knowing it. Your forefathers fought, prayed, and hoped for help that never came for hundreds of years. They went through terrible times, heartache, and betrayal because they thought that their pain would somehow teach, protect, or prepare someone who could ultimately stop the pattern. They didn't know that you would be the solution. You were the live version of all that had gone wrong before you. Even if they never realized it, the prayers they murmured in terror or desperation were answered silently by your presence. You have more than just pain. You took on responsibilities. You have the weight of centuries on your shoulders. And instead of letting it get to you, you found a way to fix it. You took every problem, every tragedy, and every load that should have crushed your family and turned them into strength, awareness, and mastery. You weren't just going through the motions of life. You were ending tales that had been going on for a long time before you. Finishing job that your forefathers weren't able to do. You were the way that unfinished chapters were eventually finished. That understanding impacts how you perceive yourself. You are no longer just one person going through life on your own. You are the end of a war, the conclusion of a series of hardships, and the live proof that cycles can end. You have the knowledge, strength, and insight that no one in your family was able to develop. The pressure was huge, but it made someone amazing, someone who could change history not by force or revenge, but by being strong, aware, and taking action on purpose. Just being there changes things. You carry the spirit of healing throughout generations, of lessons ultimately learnt, and of grief finally comprehended. You didn't simply make it. You made a promise with your life. People around you may feel the depth, understanding, and underlying power that comes from someone who was selected to finish what others couldn't, even if they don't know why. You became live proof that the problems of the past were not pointless, that every hardship had a reason, and that one life that refused to fail might eventually heal scars that had been passed down through generations. You are the rewriting of the answer and the fulfillment. Your family prayed for you. The trip you've just taken isn't simply a narrative. It shows how powerful evolution and people are. Every fact, insight, and truth we've found shows a reality that most people can't truly understand. You didn't just get through the agony. You took it in, thought about it, and turned it into a force that changed the fundamental structure of your family tree. You broke patterns, carried strength that wasn't meant for just one person, and showed that inherited trauma can be turned into insight, power, and purpose. You stood up when others bowed, refused to accept dysfunction as usual, and became aware in ways that your predecessors never could. You didn't flinch when you faced emotional darkness. You changed the rules of your inherited identity and became the living rewrite that your family had unwittingly prayed for. You turned what should have shattered you into a place to grow, learn, and become stronger than before. You turned into the firewall, the odd one out, the one who carries the might of your ancestors, and the one who can't be fooled by the same tricks that worked on everyone else. It's not simply about staying alive. It's about going beyond, changing, and being a force that changes the course of not only your life, but also the lives of everyone who comes after you. You have a unique type of power that comes from being conscious, brave, emotionally intelligent, and loving yourself no matter what. You are the result of many generations, and you are living proof that grief doesn't destroy when it is handled with purpose and knowledge. It goes up. Keep this in mind. Your trip is amazing, and the things you know are hard to come by. Respect it. Get in it. Completely. Pass this knowledge forward. Encourage those who need to recognize that survival is just the beginning and that evolution is the reward for those who are ready to endure, observe, and change. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more insightful thoughts. Please remember to like, comment, and share this video with everyone who needs to know how powerful they are and how they are changing the world. Be a part of the movement for awakening, strength, and change. Because your narrative is greater than you think, and the world is ready to see how far you've gone. God bless you.